All right, I want to explain a little bit about end behavior here. Before I get into the actual lesson or what I want to tell you about, I want you to just think of a simple concept here. So in purple, I have the x-axis. And in red is the y-axis. Right now I want to focus on the x-axis, the one that's in purple here. So let me ask a question. Where the graph is divided between your y and your x, where I'm putting this plus right here, if I want to say that the x values are going in this direction, they are getting smaller. They are getting smaller, they are getting less in value. They are going in what direction? If I start at 0 and I keep going in this direction and they're getting smaller, what direction is it? Hopefully you said left. In math, when we want to say the left side or the left boundary, we say that x, and we use this arrow, approaches negative infinity. So that's saying right there, we read that arrow as approaches. X is approaching negative infinity. So x is approaching negative infinity. All that means is it's the left side of the graph. But in math, if we don't say the left side, we say x is approaching negative infinity. So on the contrary, on the opposite side of that, if I start at 0 and I'm going greater, my x values along this x-axis are getting larger. What direction are the x's going if they are getting larger? Hopefully you said they're going to the right. So if I'm going to the right, they're getting larger. So when we want to say that in math, we say x is approaching positive infinity. All that means is it's the right side of the graph. All right, so here, if I'm talking about end behavior, and there'll be another lesson on this, but I just want to get you the idea, the concept here. All you're doing is you're looking at the left side of the graph and the right side of the graph. So if I'm looking at this line that I just drew here, this line here, this is my graph. That's what I'm talking about, my graph. The left side, what is this graph doing? It's the last thing I see on this graph. I see an arrow. What direction is the arrow pointing? It's pointing down. So if I'm talking about going down on the graph, which is really what I'm talking about, my f of x or y value, I say that y is approaching negative infinity. Why? Because the arrow's going down. So on this other side, I've got an arrow. Now I'm talking about the right side of the graph again. So I'm over here with x is approaching positive infinity, and I look at my graph and I see that my arrow is pointing up. So the graph is pointing up. So my f of x, and remember f of x equals y, is approaching, if the arrow is pointing up, it's positive infinity or just infinity. So I want you to think about that concept, rewind this video, try to understand that. I'm going to show you one more thing. All right, if I wanted to ask you, or wanted you had to write or identify the end behavior of this particular graph, you will talk about the left side of the graph and the right side of the graph, the far left, the far right. So what is happening on the left side of the graph to this graph? What is happening on the right side of the graph to the graph? So to say that mathematically, we would approach we would say x is approaching, my left side again, remember x is approaching negative infinity, as f of x, or y, is approaching. Okay, so this is my left side over here. My arrow is pointing down, so which way is pointing down? Negative infinity. So to finish this statement, f of x is approaching negative infinity. That's one statement. When you're talking about end behavior, you have two statements. The left side, which we have here. So this is the left. Now we're going to do the right. So if I want to say the right side of my graph, x is approaching positive infinity. That's my right side. So I write that. X is approaching infinity. As f of x, or y, f of x, I said y and I wrote that. So f of x is approaching, look at this graph, what's happening to the graph? It's pointing up, it's going up, it's positive infinity. So that's just a basic. So try to rewind this video, see what your understanding is, and then base that on as I go on to another.